So, for today's review, I'm covering a classic film that was poorly received at first, mostly thanks to how it did everything differently from the way you'd expect. The movie is called 12 Angry Men, and it really isn't much like a movie at all. The story about the story. I've spoken before about how the beginning of the end of the studio system came in 1948 thanks to a long-delayed antitrust Supreme Court ruling. Now, the reason why Howard Hughes had a hand in the end is because he was, at that time, the owner of RKO, which had been suffering under financial strain even before Hughes took over. Hughes saw the court ruling as an opportunity to jettison dead weight and divide RKO into two entities, the studio and the theater chain. And his success at doing so took the wind out of the sails of the other studios which were trying to claim that doing so would destroy their businesses. But there was another big reason why the studio system ended, and this reason was called television. The technology had been in development for decades, but TVs only started to catch on in the post-war period thanks to dropping prices and the growth of national broadcast stations like ABC and NBC. Broadcast TV was completely free to anyone who could buy a set, and the programming paid for itself with ad revenue, much the same as radio stations. Very much the same, in fact, since all the television stations started out as radio broadcast networks, and many of the first TV shows were adaptations of their radio shows. It was sort of like the reverse development of films and talkies when you think about it. But because TV originated outside of Hollywood, and because live television was and still is very common, the broadcast networks developed much more out of the New York theater acting scene rather than Hollywood and the film studios. The original screens may have been small and the quality garbage, but TV was free, it came right into people's homes, and it had the film studios running scared. Television is why the studios made the expensive upgrade to widescreen color, and it's why cutting their theater divisions loose suddenly became an appealing alternative. The reason I'm bringing all of this up now is because 12 Angry Men is much more an extension of television than it is a Hollywood production. In the first place, the film was released through United Artists, which tells you something right there. But more importantly, the 1957 movie is actually a remake of a made-for-TV movie which came out in 1954. The majority of the actors had more experience with television and theater than with movies, and considering the budget was an anemic $340,000, the fact that the actors knew how to rehearse and get things done in one take came in real handy. Film stock was very expensive, you see. 12 Angry Men the movie was the brainchild of Henry Fonda. It was his idea to adapt Reginald Rose's story into a feature-length film. The two men acted as the film's producers, and Fonda was the lead actor. They chose Sidney Lumet to direct the project, and although he directed TV shows since 1950, this was his first movie project. Lumet would later go on to direct dozens of films, many of which featured equally powerful social commentary, including Murder on the Orient Express, Dog Day Afternoon, Network, and The Verdict. Unfortunately, 12 Angry Men didn't do too well at the box office. It was a black and white film at a time when the public was demanding color, and while the unconventional style made the movie a critical darling, moviegoers weren't nearly so impressed. Fortunately, 12 Angry Men did remarkably well in the international market, kind of funny considering it's about the American justice system, and as the decades passed, the movie became well regarded as a classic. The story. We begin with the end of a New York criminal court case. An unnamed boy of unknown but non-white ethnicity stands accused of killing his father. The judge, who sounds like he can barely suppress a yawn, instructs the jury that since this is a first-degree murder trial, the death penalty is mandatory if they find the defendant guilty. As such, the verdict must be unanimous, and the young man's life is in their hands. The judge dismisses the alternate jurors, who are there to replace the regular jurors in case one gets disqualified for some reason, and so 12 white men leave the stand and enter the jury deliberation room. The 12 men are intentionally kept anonymous. We know their juror numbers, but pretty much nothing else. However, numbers are boring, so I'm going to come up with some nicknames. The jurors chat for a while for a long, uninterrupted 6-minute take, during which Juror 6, the Yankees fan in the striped everything, mentions that the weather station predicts today will be the hottest day of the year. The foreman, Juror 1, calls everyone to the table and asks them to sit in order by number. They do so, since they might as well. The foreman then asks for a preliminary vote with a show of hands. 11 jurors vote guilty, but Henry Fonda, who is dressed rather obviously in white, votes not guilty. Lantern Jaw, Juror 3, asks Fonda if he thinks the boy is guilty, but Fonda isn't sure, and he only says that the kid deserves at least a little discussion before they all send him to the electric chair. The boy grew up in a slum. His father beat him up every day when he wasn't in jail, and so it would be kind of awful to just kill him off without talking about the case first. So, Adman, Juror 12, proposes that they go around the table and list the reasons why they think the boy is guilty. First, Juror 2, Mousy Dude, says the boy just looked guilty. So Fonda points out that the burden of proof is with the prosecution. If there's any reasonable doubt, the jury must find not guilty. Juror 3, Lantern Jaw, points out that an old man who lived under the defendant's apartment heard the fight upstairs, heard the boy shout, "I'm gonna kill you," and saw the boy run out of the building. Juror 4, the Vulcan, says that the boy claimed he was at the movies at the time of the killing, but no one saw him there, and he couldn't remember later which films he saw. Juror 10, Racist Asshole, interrupts the order and brings up the other witness, a woman across the street who saw everything. Now, it was through an L train, but the train was empty at the time, and the prosecution had proven that you could see someone through the car windows at night. Juror 5, Slumdog, skips his turn, so Juror 6, Hair Grease, brings up the motive. The folks in the apartment across the way had heard a heated argument at around 8 o'clock, 4 hours before the stabbing. Fonda doesn't think the motive is very strong, since the boy and his father argued rather constantly. Next up is Yankees fan, and he brings up the boy's history of violent and criminal behavior. This inspires Lantern Jaw to make a Kids These Days speech and mention his own son, a son whom he was tough on and with whom he is now estranged. Fonda is Juror 8, and when his turn comes up, he explains that the reason he's doubting so much is because he didn't think the defense lawyer was doing his job. The prosecution's case is based entirely around 2 witnesses, and Fonda thinks they could have been mistaken, and the appointed defense attorney didn't try to find out. Lantern Jaw brings up the switchblade used in the killing, a knife the boy apparently bought earlier that same day. So they have the knife brought in, a knife with a very particular handle and a serpentine blade. The boy claims he lost it while he was out at the movies, and it would have been an incredible coincidence if someone found it and used it to kill his father. The Vulcan is very adamant about the blade being unique, so in response, Fonda pulls out an exact duplicate and stabs it into the table next to the evidence knife. He explains that he found the knife in a pawn shop in the boy's neighborhood, proving that the knife wasn't nearly as unique as the prosecution claimed. Still, the other jurors aren't convinced, so Fonda offers a proposition. The 11 other men will vote by secret ballot, and if they all still vote guilty, he'll accept the verdict. They do so, and 1 vote comes in not guilty. Lantern Jaw accuses Slumdog of switching his vote, but it turns out to be juror number 9, the pensioner. He's proud of the way Fonda stood up to the other 11, and he wants the debate to continue. So they take a short break. As the second act begins, the cameras move from above eye level down to even, and the lenses grow longer so that the room appears to shrink. Fonda brings up the L train, and he points out that according to the woman, it was going past the apartment before and during the stabbing, and considering how noisy it is, it makes it improbable that the old man downstairs clearly heard the boys shout. Lantern Jaw asks why the old man would have lied, so the pensioner explains that he probably just wanted attention. Not many people would have listened to him throughout his life, so he used this opportunity to be as certain as possible so that people would pay attention to him. Fonda then discusses how "I'm gonna kill you" doesn't necessarily mean exactly that, mostly with Lantern Jaw, and after that, Slumdog changes his vote, making it 9-3. Then, Juror 11, the European, stands up and points out that the boy was captured by the police at 3 a.m. in his own home, and he asks why the boy would have returned after murdering his father. The Vulcan says it was to retrieve his knife after fleeing the scene in a panic, but then the European points out that he was apparently calm enough to wipe the knife of fingerprints before he left. On top of that, the woman witness had screamed after she saw the stabbing, which means the boy would have known someone had seen. Racist Asshole gets upset at how things are going, but Fonda calls for another vote, and the European switches to not guilty. The conversation goes back around to the old man, and they discover another problem. The old man had a bad limp, which means it was impossible for him to cross to his front door fast enough to see the boy run out of the apartment 15 seconds after the stabbing. They even pull out a diagram and test it out. Lantern Jaw gets upset yet again, and Fonda speculates that for him it's personal. Lantern Jaw almost slugs him and shouts, "I'll kill you!" And Fonda points out that he didn't really mean that, did he? When everyone takes their seats again, the European gives a very patriotic speech about how the American jury system is really amazing when you think about it. An act of direct democracy which features in every major criminal and civil trial. And what with him being a naturalized American citizen, it makes sense that he would be the one to make the speech. The jury takes another vote, and this time Mousy Dude and Hair Grease switch, tying things 6-6. We're now an hour into the deliberations, and it's time for the second break. After this, the lenses get even longer, and the cameras drop to below eye level. On top of that, a storm blows in, forcing the jurors to turn on the lights and close the windows. When they return to the case, Fonda points out that the boy only forgot which movies he saw when he was being questioned by the detectives on the scene in front of his dead father, and therefore while he was in a severe state of shock. He remembered them later, but that's not good enough for the Vulcan. So Fonda asks the Vulcan to think back several days until he starts to forget details, and he points out that the boy was under considerably more stress. Mousy Dude then points out that the stab wound was made at a downward angle, an awkward position considering how much shorter the boy was than his father. Slumdog adds to this by pointing out that switchblades are designed for stabbing upwards, and as a knife fighter, the boy would have known how to use a switchblade correctly. After the demonstration, Yankees fan switches his vote, apparently just to break the tie. Now bear in mind, he's been getting on everyone's nerves all evening with the way he's been joking around, and so people from both sides take offense to him changing his mind on a win. The European presses him on it, and so, at length, Yankees fan admits that he no longer thinks the boy is guilty. Fonda calls for another vote, and both Adman and the foreman join the not guilty ranks, leaving only Racist Asshole, Lantern Jaw, and the Vulcan. Racist Asshole takes this moment to go on a racist tirade about those people, and one by one, everyone, even those on his side, turn their backs to him. Only the Vulcan can manage to sit there and listen, and he's the one to tell Racist Asshole to sit down and shut up for the rest of the movie. It's a very powerful moment. The Vulcan now takes the lead and points out that the woman was an eyewitness to the murder and positively identified the boy. It's enough for Adman to switch back. But when the Vulcan takes off his glasses and rubs the bridge of his nose, the pensioner realizes that the woman did the same thing, and she also had the marks which glasses leave on the nose. The other jurors confirm this, and the pensioner speculates that she left her glasses at home for vanity's sake. If she did have glasses, then she obviously wouldn't have worn them to bed, and according to her testimony, she didn't have enough time to put them on before she saw the murder. It's enough to convince the Vulcan, and now Lantern Jaw is the only juror left on the guilty side. He's been contradicting himself all evening, but he hangs on to his opinion out of sheer stubbornness. He shouts that they can't prove their arguments, and he's right. But that's the thing about reasonable doubt. They don't have to. He does. The other jurors stare at him, unconvinced, and when he pulls out his wallet and sees the picture of his son, he grabs it and tears it up in a fit of rage. A second later, he realizes what he's done and why he's being so stubborn, and as he collapses over what's left of the photo, he says, "Not guilty. Not guilty." With a unanimous decision, the jurors head back to the courtroom. Final thoughts. As you might expect from a film, 12 Angry Men isn't entirely realistic. In the first place, most of the jurors probably would have been screened out of the pool before the trial even began, and Henry Fonda's character definitely overstepped his bounds when he introduced evidence by producing that duplicate knife. The speculation about the woman's eyesight was also rather excessive, and in both cases, the jury was basically doing what the defense lawyer should have done. A defense lawyer who would have had the opportunity to do research and ask the witnesses these questions in order to get hard, factual evidence instead of speculations. Also, it's unlikely that a New York jury in the late 50s would have been entirely white men. In 1957 Mississippi, sure, or maybe 1947 New York, but not in that place and time. Finally, a judge probably wouldn't have yawned his way through a capital crime like that, even if he did think the case was open and shut. Judges generally have more respect for a man's life than that. Still, despite how often court cases become sensational stories, whether real or fictional, it's rare to see anyone focus on the jury the way 12 Angry Men does. The usual characters are the lawyers, the witnesses, the plaintiffs, and the defendants. The jury is treated like a prop, there to fill in the set and give the lawyers somewhere to look when making arguments. It's not hard to see why, considering 12 Angry Men's difficult format, and especially the way Fonda's character often acts in place of the defense lawyer, but maybe it's a mistake not to give the jury more consideration. Juries aren't unique to the American justice system, but their size and their ubiquity are. More so than in any other nation, court cases are decided by regular people, not politicians or political appointees, and 12 Angry Men shows this fact better than any ordinary courtroom drama. Perhaps that's why the film has a reputation for inspiring an unusual number of people to go into law school, because it shows that yes, you can make a difference, even if you're some anonymous white guy from a poor neighborhood. Thanks for joining me again for today's film review, and I hope you'll join me next time when I cover a very classic noir about a cop on the edge, a fast-talking mob boss, two ambiguously gay henchmen, and the giddy broads who love them.